And gentlemen, it's Saturday the 12th of September 2020. It's Justin Johnson. On the module DD103, Investigating the Social World 1. On page 24, on chapter 1, Exploring Home, Sociology, Social Divisions and Social Change. Stay with me, I'm trying to make it a bit more amicable for other students. I'm a mature student and this is what I do. I like to record, re-listen to my study. When I have my TMA, the final module, I'll re-listen to my notes and that's how I predict my grade. I want to get through this. I want to do the best I can to provide for my family. Home. Most families decided to put in the front room a decision that marked an incursion into a household space that had been reserved for adults, leading some way to the creation of the living room or lounge. As it is now often called, open plan spaces such as linked living room and dining rooms and kitchens, from which the TV can be viewed. Livingstone 2007 are an extension of the central role and place of TV as a household object. Shaping the use of space in the home, there is also some evidence, albeit somewhat dated, that some new gender divisions and roles were produced, such as domination of remote control by men and their preference for sports over other kinds of women's programmes. Let's look at the differentials in men and women's TV programmes. A man would like to watch Top Gear or fishing channels or boxing. As a woman would like to watch Coronation Street, Emmerdale, all the soaps, reality TV shows, Come Dine With Me, Celebrity Get Me Out of Here. Also, like the situation of the TV, how it's like in Churchill's house, there's one TV in the living room, so they all have to sit down and watch each other's programmes together as a family unit. Possibly taking it in turns, but as he was saying here, the man's having control of the remote control. In activity 5, now you've looked at the outline of a Victorian house and a contemporary luxury apartment and read about churches. How do these situations differ from your own residence and living arrangements? Like Churchill's arrangements, he's out working a lot, had one TV, but that one day he'd come in to watch TV, he'd watched TV as a family. Discussion. This activity may have helped you think about how space in your own home reflects social relations. I mean, your social relation could be squabbling with your brother or sister. They want to watch their programme over yours. You've got a younger brother and it has to watch his, I don't know, Roger Rabbit, anything like that. And you're a teenager yourself, you want to watch Saved by the Bell perhaps. It's an argument. It may be quite different from examples you have just read about. In common with those examples, it is likely to be shaped by social divisions such as class, gender and age. The examples of the TV and the Churchill household are instances of spatial practices, how space is mapped onto actual use and how it is lived on an everyday basis. The idea of zones described in the following sections extends this way of thinking about spaces. I mean, you can see why a lot of squabbles go on over the TV in a household, especially if you've got a household full of 5 people. I'm not really a TV watcher, I never really have been. I look at the TV, I look straight through it, I like reading. And you can see why. I can depict a good story and a good description. 3.3, Zone 1, Young People and Bedroom Culture. The idea of bedroom culture originated in the 1970s as a criticism of the predominant focus by sociologists on the boys and young men did in public places such as the street. Schools or football grounds, bedroom culture provided a gender-based response to the emphasis of street culture as a masculine place. I mean, you're a young lad, you want these, you know, you're grown up, but you don't want, you'll make it your masculine, like a picture of Tupac or, your famous guy that leaves that legacy that you want to inspire your friends that you want to be like, but you're not really. It's just how you want to depict yourself, your mannerism, even though you're not really that person. Giving the wrong deflection to people to make you think you're more masculine than what you are. Feminist scholars such as McRobbie and Garber, 1976, looked at what girls did. In the home, they highlighted the bedroom as a space where girls and young women were active in developing their identities by putting up posters, reading magazines, and practicing applying makeup. The bedroom was private space, physically apart from parents and sometimes from siblings too. It provided a means of managing social relations within the home by keeping space or a zone separate from the young adult world. I mean, you can imagine like girls growing up, they might have a leopard print bed, but giving guys the wrong impression to their sexuality, you know, making them thinking they're putting themselves out there. Really not, they're just doing it for a feature to make them think there's something they're not. So don't always buy the cover of the book. It's what's inside that counts, is what I'm getting at. Figure 1.5. Bedroom culture saw the bedroom as a space where girls and young women actively developed their identities. It was suggested early in this chapter that housing design can be viewed in the terms of codes. Lincoln, 2004, suggests zone is a better term to understand something such as bedroom culture. She urges that this is because codes are cultural and symbolic. But the notion of zone stresses the physical arrangement of objects, furniture and technology. In a particular space, it is therefore more concerned with how material objects are arranged and their role in structuring space and social relations. Where codes tend to keep people, spaces and objects apart from, Lincoln 2004 uses zones as a way of thinking about how spaces might also overlap their interrogate. Among the most significant objects she identifies are the TV, music systems, computer and mobile phone. The increased presence of these in some homes may lead families to spend more time together in the living room. For instance, it may also lead to more separation with a household as people do things on their own, such as surfing the internet, for example. I mean, I'm very creative, so I like a bit of mindfulness. I like, you know, I don't like singing, but I do like to write my own songs. So singing in a karaoke where I want to really be writing my own songs, I need a bit of mindfulness. I need maybe a violin or a bit of instrumental in the background. I don't really want someone to be singing in my ear while I'm trying to think. Page 26. Just give me examples to help you through your study, your own ideas. You know, when you come into reading, you've got to be creative with your way of thinking and depict different, you know, different directions you can tackle the source reading. Of course, source referencing. Chapter 1, Exploring Home, Sociology, Social Divisions and Social Change. Activity 6, think about the contents of your bedroom. When you were a child, the furniture and the objects, such as technology, in it. Did the arrangement on these objects reflect your style or personality? What difference do you think being female or male made to your experience of your bedroom culture? To think about the bedroom as a zone emphasises the presence of material objects in that space and how these objects shape and contribute to social relations in the home. In recent decades, there has been a growth in multiple TV sets in the home as well as a proliferation of actual television channels due to the spread of satellite and cable services. However, the rise in digitally connected household is more marked than the increase in the number of TVs per household, with TV ownership in the UK showing signs of showing since 2010, BARB 2015. The rapid development of digital and communication technologies is commonly regarded as heralding a generation divide. At the time of writing, young people under 16 are sometimes referred to as digital natives because such resources have been present through their lives, whereas older people are digital immigrants. However, even though mobile technology is more than an ever present phenomenon in the lives of young people, terms such as natives and immigrants exaggerate to the extent to which older people are resistant to technology. There is evidence that older people divide almost equally between being critical and adapting in terms of accepting technology, while an Malenkopf, 2003. Livingstone, 2007, on page 26. has pointed out that in media-rich homes and bedrooms, there has been multiplication of domestic media goods as well as diversification as more of a different media goods are acquired. She stresses that these developments have tended to make bedrooms, especially for children in more prosperous households who have a room of their own, into spaces for private consumption of media, and the TV and the internet in particular. In turn, the real living room becomes a shared space when families spend time together. Her research shows that the bedroom becomes a space where young people say they can escape to and have some freedom for parental supervision. Living together separately is a phrase that captures this sense of family life. Thinking back to bedroom culture in the 1970s, however, there are still continuities as young people then also sought the bedroom as a space to keep apart from the rest of the household. In spite of this, technological developments can also be seen as bringing people together in different ways. For example, talking to friends and relatives via social media and video chat facilities such as Skype. This indicates that the relationship between technology and social change does not just go into one direction. Who uses which zones in the home is divided by social class. Many young people share a bedroom as well as gender, so these divisions intersect rather than exist in separate compartments. The meanings and roles of technology in a home are also varied by age, and the next section focuses on older people. Page 27, space at home, the codes to zones. 3-4, zone 2, older people and kitchen technology. The beginning of the chapter mentioned the increase of people living alone, and part of the reason for this is to the rise in life expectancy. For many older people, living at home feels more dignified and secure than living in an old people's home. Technology can have an important role to play, enabling older people to live at home, allowing them to stay in a space that is familiar rather than strange, giving them a degree of autonomy rather than dependency. This idea is of home chimes, with the view that it is safe, confronting the familiar space. Evidence supports this idea that older people are a group less likely to move home. The UK policy think tank, Joseph Rowntree Foundation, found that only 3% of the household with no one aged under 55, they move every year. It's also found that people aged 75 or older are least likely to move home. Pennell et al. 2012. There are probably many reasons for this, including, for example, economic factors and family ties. The discussion of older people and technology at home is sometimes framed in terms of assisted living, the use of technology aids that can enable people to adapt to the home environment, thus allowing them to remain at home. This includes adaptations to the home that make mobility easier. However, in addition, the place of ordinary everyday technologies is useful for thinking about the use of space in the home. Research finds essential heating, TVs and washing machines appear to greater impact or quality of life than more cutting-edge technologies. Wohl and Mollenkopf 2003, with older people stressing that the design and usability of these everyday objects matter. Page 28. I hope you guys are staying with me. Obviously, some of these things don't relate to us because we're not that age. We have got grandmas and granny. Maybe you can think and relate to these conversations. But mine are not about my older folks. And, trying to improvise with some of this scripture doesn't quite relate to my optimism. But I do. My parents are getting older, so I can relate, a bit. They need things to get into the shower, standing frame to help them aided, a commode to get in a toilet. Not my parents do, but you can think of the different things. Chapter 1, Exploring Home Sociology, Social Division and Social Change. More for the quality of the home environment and owning the later technology aids. A research study in the kitchen and how it can be adapted for older people at home was carried out to Open University. Maguire et al. 2003. The purpose of this study was to identify ways of assisting people to maintain their desired independence and autonomy at home. Such studies investigate how the zone of the kitchen is actually lived and used. Maguire, etc. Our study was qualitative and used a semi-structured interview of 40 people in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. The first part of the interview was about their kitchen history, their relocation to the kitchens they had known in their lives. The second part focused on the kitchen in their current home. I mean, you can sort of adapt to thinking what could your parents need to better their life. You know, maybe your mum's struggling to get to the telephone, maybe it's in the wrong place. You need to put it in a animal place that she can reach. Or, you know, it's got to be in a space where it's not crowded by other furniture. You'll think outside the box when it comes to old folks. You know, getting to the sink, maybe the sink's too high up, she needs it lowered down with a worktop. Just, you know, thinking outside the box. Some of you guys might be a lot better at this than me. You might have worked with elderly patients. I've helped elderly people, you know. So we do know, everyone knows, we're all good for this creativity, using our mindfulness. Creativity plus mindfulness equals creativity. Activity 7, thinking about your own kitchen history will be useful in framing the rest of the section. Describe the kitchens in the places you have lived. What memories do you evoke of home life? Briefly think about the kitchen at your current home. How well suited it is for your physical abilities and, if applicable, how do you cope with any problems in using it? I've seen these sinks, guys. They can wind up and wind down for parents in wheelchairs so they can reach the sink. And they've got the hose at the back of the tap. It goes up and down on a spindle, so it won't. You know, obviously our pipes would snap if you had it wind up and down. But there are technology now that, you know, adapt to elderly patients in wheelchairs, and they want to be independent. We don't all live in a home around other people. I especially don't when I'm older. So, you know, just ideas that we can put into practice. Page 28. The people interviewed in this study recalled the kitchen of the early 20th century as usually being the cosiest room in a house, and its warmth was obviously important in a period before the spread of central heating. They also saw the kitchen as a space occupied by most of our family members. It was a space in which many different activities were carried out, including mending and making, reading and listening to the radio, playing games, as well as the activities that the kitchen is more usually known for: cooking, cleaning and sometimes eating. These relocations indicate that the kitchen once provided space rather than what goes on in the living room of the contemporary home. The spread of central heating, as well as the advent of the TV, are among technologies that increase the gap between the kitchen and other rooms in the house. Nevertheless, for the people interviewed in the study, the kitchen retained its key or central role. It remains an important hub of people's homes, a multifunctional space for a range of activities, including baking, washing clothes, writing letters, having tea with a friend and feeding with pets. On page 29. Older people often find it personally rewarding to continue with familiar kitchen routines and skills known throughout their lives. A lot of older people, you find, they like dogs. Dogs are very good for people suffering with asthma. Dogs can, if dogs are like human franchise, they can pick when you're not well. They'll sit by you. They'll keep you comfort as well. They're good for your heart to keep you ticking. They know when you're not well. They come and sit with you, keep you comfort. A comforter is very good in life for compassion. Dogs got great compassion. Humans have as well. But when a lot of kids, as your old folks get old, they don't interact with their folks too much because they're old and they're getting senile. And it's, she keeps repeating herself. It's doing my head in. So that sort of compassion sort of loosens off as your OAPs get older, unfortunately. Not for me. I've got good compassion, I believe. Maguire et al. 2013. Figure 1.6. Elder people often improvise solutions to overcome difficulties within kitchen technologies. However, when talking about their current kitchen, difficulties were identified across the age range of those interviewed. These are most commonly connected to being able to reach and bend toward cupboards and appliances. Sight and lighting problems with small size instructions on packets and visibility of displays on cookers, for example, and dexterity, opening jars or tins. Using a can opener in practice of people in the study have improvised a range of solutions for these difficulties, including the use of magnifying glasses, modifying cupboards and shelves, such as using carousel shelving and even installing and taking microwave oven in one case. In relation to everyday, we're looking on page 30. Domestic technology, the microwave oven, cooker, dishwasher and washing machine, and others. The iron, for example, it is useful to recall how all these have been developed and sold as time and labour saving devices, designed to make housework easier. Yet sometimes these same devices can be disabling and difficult to use, not because of their complexity. Although we call that Robert, a middle-aged man, said he couldn't use the washing machine as it was too complicated, but rather because their design is not always attuned to the needs of different groups of people, such as their elderly. While this is a small-scale qualitative study carried out in England, Maguire et al. 2013 suggests that its finds could be applicable in other countries. Problems with kitchens technology are not unique in older people and apply to other groups of people too, as you may have felt with doing Activity 7. Even well-established and quite long-standing technologies such as microwave ovens and washing machines can present difficulties for people with reduced strength and dexterity of inability to reach and bend. The conclusions of the research indicate not only changes in the role of technology in the kitchen. Have you walked in them washing shower rooms? You can wash, older people probably try and wash their clothes in them. I would. I washed my clothes in the shower before, no problem. But also changing uses of the space in the home overall. Kitchens were recalled by the elderly as communal spaces where a range of activities occurred. However, most of the time, the kitchen remained a separate room or space. This is in stark contrast to the design of kitchens in recent times, which has shifted towards open plan spaces, blending the kitchen and other rooms. Yet, the role of the kitchen in home also appears to show significant degree to continuity, even if the designs and contents of the space have changed. I'm pretty sure when they build these communal areas for the elderly and one works significantly well, they're going to do like a scale of what works best and what doesn't, and they're going to keep providing that as much as possible for the elderly. They have all different, in different constituencies, have different elderly communal areas. They probably provide different access for all different varieties. Like the bedroom culture of young people, the place of the kitchen in their lives for elderly people suggests that there are both continuities and change in the ways that social relations develop over time, and the meanings of home. For most of the young people studied, the home was a family or communal space shared with other people. For some of the older people, home was space for one person living alone, of course, neither young nor old. People among whom homogeneous as groups than any other groups, and age, like all social divisions, intersects with other divisions. Yet, for young and old, home is also about developing and maintaining some autonomy. For the young, the bedroom provides independence and adult free space. For older people, continue to live in their own home allows them to retain a measure of independence. In both cases, material objects such as technology, they are important to home life. This reinforces the idea of thinking of home space in terms of zones. The arrangement of objects in spaces reflects the meanings of space in a home, the design or the redesign of home spaces, and how contemporary living spaces are shaped by ideas of lifestyle, taste and fashion. It reveals how other people see themselves or wish to be seen, and their relations with other people and with objects in their home. We'll look at a summary. The design of homes reflects social codes and appropriate spaces and activities from different types of people. It's page 31. Generational difference is a social division that can be seen changing and continuing social relations in a home. use and the placement of technology in the home for both younger and older people. It is important in shaping particular meaning of a home. We look at page 32, chapter 1, exploring home sociology, social difference and social change. Look at the conclusion. Come back to the end of the page, end of the chapter. The chapter is drawn on the home setting to examine social change and social divisions. Drawn on those themes, sociologists use the ideas about time and space and qualitative and quantitative methods to investigate how the home is setting and that it is indicative of both macro and micro level changes in society. However, there is a simple or one-way relationship between home and changing social and economic and cultural factors. Sociology is particularly attuned to investigating links between social change and personal, biographical, and the social historical. Social division in the home demonstrate these links. Social change is also evident throughout technology updates in the home by looking at the place and use of everyday technology in domestic space. This chapter has brought out how time and space is involved in social division in the home, such as the role of gender in daily routines of men and women at home. The ideas of particularly codes and zones were drawn to explore how these demarcated and used in the home by investigating time and space and gender and generation, and chapter has sought to put across these key points. The home is a location to observe social division and work. Various social divisions and interconnected or intersect do not exist on one level only. Changes in ways of living at home are closely related to wider social changes. I'll go for I'm not got, obviously, old people, they live in a bungalow. I've got brain nuts, it's hard for me to get upstairs, but the same as old people, they might have a old home, family home that belongs to their family home, 2-storey home. They can't get upstairs, they put stair lifts in, Also my children, they got club feet and stuff, They're probably going to suffer with arthritis, Raynaud's, whatever else, at a later date in life, same as me. So a house with stairs is not really feasible or appropriate for my loved ones. Anyway, we're going on to page 39. I hope you follow me, guys. Really appreciate you listeners. Hope I'm contributing some my own knowledge to back a good story to the plan. Maybe you've got better ideas. I appreciate you taking on board anyway. If you're listening, I'm trying to help others. Some of you might not be able to read and function the way I do at the same time, but then you get other ideas through my ideas, which is helping other students. Page 39, introduction. Questioning is a key component of social science investigation in the previous chapter. You saw this investigative technique applied to the idea of home, looked at from a sociological point of view. The chapter explored the module theme of inequality through questioning time use and use of technology in the home. It argued what happens in the home in linked with wider cultural context and socio-economic conditions and changes. The chapter shifts away from the inner life of the home to investigate broader social issue of housing through the lens of social policy and criminology. Specifically, the chapter explores different ways people gain access to housing and question whether certain kinds of housing and housing tenure, for example, whether someone buys their home, privately rents, or it lives in social housing, are linked to different social outcomes such as educational attainment, income levels or higher or lower crime rates. When you go through school, try and get your academic years, maybe you got mixed up with the wrong people through school. They're going to look at putting you in a house with that sort of welfare society, the way you tenor your mannerism, the way, if you're trying to broaden your horizon and stick with the academic kids, they're going to look after you. If you're going towards corruption, they're going to keep you involved in corruption. Simple as that. Anyway, figure 2.1, social housing in London, England. In this chapter, inequality is considered alongside the concept of the welfare state. The concept is important because in the United Kingdom in particular, the social fields of social policy and, going on page 40, I've got to put my charger in, guys. I'm just going to bear with me 1 second. I don't want my phone to die. It's important that I keep going for the duration of the reading. Page 40, investigating housing policy and crime. You get put in a suburban constituency, in a flat, rural flat. You're going to have all kinds of people in there. Not necessarily sex offenders, but you're going to have people like trafficking, all kinds of things going on. You're going to have racketeering, arson, all them kinds of people will be in them sort of urban, suburban constituencies. I've been in London, I've seen it. I've been in, Metropolitan Lunatic Asylum estate myself, on the border. I was on the outskirts, luckily. I'm in such a nice, calm and pleasant atmosphere right now. Chapter 2, investigating housing, social policy and crime. Criminology have traditionally sought to examine social problems alongside different welfarist policies. This chapter will demonstrate that even though social policy and criminology are concerned with different sets of problems, they often share a common focus of concern and utilise similar strategies of inquiry. NEPA 2007, page 4. I mean, it can happen to us all in any part of our life. And just so you know, even at later on in life, I'm in a nice way of life in a minute. I picked myself up and moved away from my constituency, well away. And I was in there probably worse surroundings, if you like. But I was guided by going to the people I surrounded myself with. Surround yourself with tea drinkers, become a cup of tea. I went to church. I was converted facilitator, a homeless support worker. I was wrapped around good people. So sometimes you just go in your house, shut your door, don't intervene with other people on the outside, because once you start intervening with people on the outside, you're going to become like the people on the outside. The chapter will explore the role of the state, private companies and charitable organisations in shaping housing policies, the linkages between housing policies and gaining access to housing, relationships between housing, social inequalities and different social outcomes, criminology investigation of housing policy and crime, the criminalisation of social policy and social problems. Section 1. Social policy and housing investigates the way social policies function in relation to housing, tracing how different policies lead to different results in availability and accessibility of housing. Section 2. Housing. Does housing status matter? Questions whether or not place matters with respect to a variety of social outcomes. Section 3. Housing crime and criminology investigates the relationship between housing policy and crime patterns and the question of whether particularly housing policies can make it more than less likely to certain populations or neighbourhoods are viewed as risky or prone to criminal activity. This is page 41. Social policy and housing. The term social policy refers to three things: the regulation or welfare and social services by the state, and ideas justifying that regulation. The implementation of the state's regulations on welfare and social services in practice involves a variety of bodies, from private sector companies to non-profit organisations, and includes formal practice within and between the families and individuals. The studies of these regulations, ideas and practices. Social policy can be viewed as an argument for or against a particular solution to a particular problem. Social policies, often represented in the form of policy documents and legislation, are produced by local or national governments or other regulatory bodies and a defined problem and propose of a solution to it. The important point is that social policies often define the problems and the solutions to those problems. These problems and solutions, however, could always be defined differently by different policymakers. Social policy studies are concerned when examining legislation, guidelines and activities that promote social ends or objectives, i.e. policies intended to improve social well-being or social welfare of citizens. Housing is one of the areas affected or influenced by social and economic policies. The state, charitable organisations and the private sector all play a role in shaping the policies that affected people's access to and acquiring housing. Moreover, various levels of government, free, for example, national or local, can be legally responsible for providing housing. In most countries, this responsibility entails three elements of policy work: the construction management and maintenance of the public housing stock, the establishment and regulation of a system of benefits enabling access to housing, the regulation of private housing sectors. So what actually constitutes a housing policy? One answer is that a housing policy sets out regulations to manage housing access, allocations and markets. Page 42. Investigating housing and social policy and crime. Housing, like so many social resources, is distributed uniquely across and between societies. The pattern of that distribution is produced by processes, rules and conventions for how people can access different types of housing. For examples, procedures for buying a house for private letting, or the eligibility criteria to access social housing. These rules or regulations do not emerge from nowhere but are made and are changeable. Local and national governments set out regulations and guidance on social or public housing. And the state also regulates many aspects of the private housing market. For example, it establishes minimum building and safety standards, parameters for the legal relationship between landlord and tenant in the rented sector, tax households for the scale of housing, incentives for lending institutions, or the private companies to build new housing, planning regulations that stipulate where the developments can and cannot be built, and the provision of the government subsidise for the first-time buyers. All these elements can be thought of a compromising housing policy. The issue of social housing, however, is not one that tends to be more firmly associated with state-run schemes, as opposed to the private housing market. While the idea of housing should be accessed through the private housing market is in itself a form of policy, which is an economic policy. This chapter will focus more heavily on social housing policies. Private ownership and housing mortgages will be discussed in chapter 3. Social housing policies, which often tend to be state-run and managed, and intended to ensure that everyone, no matter what their economic circumstances, has access to a safe place to live. The next section begins to discuss the idea of social housing in more detail and considers a brief history of some social housing policies in different countries. Why social housing? A brief history of housing policy. Did you know it took me 36 years to get my own house? Social, also sometimes referred to as public. Housing appeared in part as a progressive response to poverty and to deterioration of some neighbourhoods, which can result from a rapid change and unpredictability that some occurs as cities develop and evolve. Urban areas that were at one time prosperous and thriving economic centres can fall into decline and industry move on and change. When this happens, high levels of poverty can become concentrated in a particular area of a city. Such areas can subsequently be places that people negatively refer to as slums. One way of tackling this problem is the governments to develop social housing policies that move people out of such areas. However, this is one reason why social housing policy might be developed. There are a wide variety of other problems that social housing policies might aim to solve. I mean, you can imagine like from a perspective on the outsider looking in, why is this family getting into so much trouble? Are they not liked for, I don't know, it could be a relationship involvement where one guy is bed hopping with women or a woman's bed hopping with men, you know, causing disturbance in the neighbourhood. Then they're getting bullied by the people in that area, by drugs, alcohol perhaps. They're going to get brushed with this, tarnished with a brush, and they're going to get bullied by them sort of kind of people. Just thinking outside the box. Things escalate in societies for different reasons, and we're none of the wiser. We look at people and go, he's a smacker. We don't know why they're smacking, or we don't know why they're weed heads. We don't know what's going on in their life. We try to say, I don't like anything alcohol, narcotics, whatsoever. But when you think about growing up years and how we've been bullied throughout relationship society, it could be your ex-partner's family that done it, or friends, we don't know. But just look at it from the bigger picture. Don't go painting pictures when you don't know the inner core. Providing social housing could be seen as one means by which the state may aim to manage populations and to curtail the extent to which people with limited access to housing become more serious financial burden. Drawing on other state resources in some countries, including Britain, before the development of social housing policies, the unemployed poor were managed by the state through workhouses or poorhouses. The goal was not to reduce poverty, which was viewed at the time as a normal part of social life, rather than the workhouse was a place that provided work and shelter for those unable to support themselves. However, such places were meant to encourage people to look for alternative forms of unemployment and housing because their conditions were deliberately uncomfortable and humiliating. Indeed, these early workhouses were based on similar ideas to those that shaped early prisons in Britain, that the conditions inside the workhouse, or subsequently in prison, should not be better than the conditions of the lowest social class in society. The late 19th and early 20th century saw the development of trade unions and other working class social movements in the United Kingdom, continental Europe and United States. In addition to better working conditions, higher wages and paid holidays, one of the essential demands of these groups was a broader set of social rewards, including state-subsidised housing. In the UK, the charity took the lead in providing workers' housing. In the second half of the 19th century, foundations such as the Peabody and Guinness Trust built housing in London. Local government followed this lead, with the London County Council, for example, building homes in suburban London from the 1980s. The UK government has followed with the Housing of Working Classes Act 1885. This gave local authorities the power to close down housing considering unhealthy and set minimum standards for renting housing. However, local authorities were not provided with funds for construction until Housing Act of 1919. Page 43, guys. Page 43, Investigating Housing Social Policy Scheme. We're looking at the Wong T Sin Estates, built in Hong Kong, 1960s. Big tower buildings. Slum clearance. They call it slum clearance. They took it down. Big flats, big urban, suburban, built-up city. Big flats. You can imagine, couldn't you, all the takeaway sheds outside the front doors. Page 45. Social policy and housing. In many countries outside the UK, the state did not have responsibility for housing until the middle of the 20th century. In Hong Kong, for example, social housing only came into being in the 1950s. By the early 21st century, around half the population lived in housing. In the UK, much local authority housing is now run by housing associations, which we know. The provision of clean, safe housing is therefore a subject of social policy. This provision has assumed a number of local forms, including the construction of multi-occupancy buildings, slum clearance, and planned and garden cities and towns. The Chandigarh in northern India, figure 2.4, is an example of a planned city. It is administered by the country's central government. The space has been planned and zoned into a number of sectors, each for various activities, including residential housing. The structure of the entire city is a direct result of the policy. Access to housing. Page 46, investigating housing, social policy and crime. Access to housing is ultimately determined by the resources you have. The more money or capital you have, the more access may be to more than one home. At the other end of the scale, having minimal resources mean you cannot buy a home and therefore have to rent or attempt to access social housing. In the renting sector, you often have to prove your income as well as pay a deposit worth a number of months' rent before you can rent a property. Accumulating this amount of surplus money is a major obstacle for many people and explains why the problems of living is inadequate housing of overcrowded conditions develop. Those groups of people who are, in effect, excluded from home ownership and from privately rented market are those at whom the provision of social housing is often aimed. I mean, if anyone's like a mature student, even teenage years, you must know the social change as your parents get older. You start off, they're young parents, your child. You get stuck in like a council suburban area. Maybe they had afford their own house, but it's when they started off their poverty, economic change, growing up to bigger, better financial status perhaps. You're getting richer. Maybe as they're getting older, getting poorer because they can't keep the family home running. But you notice the change in, I call it atmospheric pressure, but the social change, the different people, the different criminology in the constituency. 1.21 Home ownership and social policy. Like the construction and allocation of social housing, home ownership can also be the subject of social policy. Governments can take measures to encourage people to buy homes rather than rent them. An example of this can be found in US history. A major policy established during the Great Depression of the 1930s was a national programme of public works and construction. If there was supply, ran the logic, there would also have to be demand. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, was established in 1934. Its brief was to extend the opportunity to own homes to a broader section of the population than had previously been the case. By underwriting loans due to failures in banking systems in the 1930s, the FHA's role was to exert more control over loans and lower the size of deposits required for house purchase. The FHA has insured hundreds of millions of dollars worth to state funding for home buyers and the construction of multi-family housing in the period since 1934. It became part of the Department for Housing of the Urban Development in 1965. Together, these agencies have insured upwards of 30 million home loans, and during the credit crunch of 2008, they replaced a sizable part of the mortgage. Leading function of the private sector institutions, the history of the FHAs demonstrates that the field of social policy includes both extending private sector home owning and provisions of social housing. I wonder, as we're having such a midlife crisis, public austerity, I wonder if the house prices really drop because people aren't afford the houses. Once the things go back on the market, people like myself can be afford to be able to jump on the housing market. That would be interesting to know. Page 47. Make a list of organisations and categories of people involved making housing policy called actors or social sciences. Decision. The actors you listed you should include bodies from the state such as ministries and possibly local authorities, private sector organisations such as construction companies and housing management firms, as well as landlords. And finally, third sector bodies such as charities and housing associations. Each of these plays a role in providing housing and managing its allocation. 1.2.2 The connection between housing and other areas of social policy. The areas covered by housing policy interact with the private housing market and the benefit system. So one might ask what role housing policy plays more generally in social policy, and why housing is of interest to social scientists studying social policy. Carter and Polevchuk, 2004, argue that it is important to think of housing and social policy as connected because better quality housing improves the efficiency of a set of other social policy initiatives. They call housing a platform for success of host of other social policy areas. Page 2, see figure 2.5. For example, in relation to healthcare, which is usually an extensive and expensive area of social policy, they suggest that housing advocates must argue, with supporting evidence that housing expenditures can reduce healthcare costs. Spending money on housing, it does not take money out of healthcare, it reduces the cost of healthcare. 2004. Their main conclusion is to poorer housing quality leads to poorer health. So spending on health would be reduced by spending more on higher quality housing. Indeed, one of the arrangements put forward for the social housing in the first place was to help eliminate disease. Yet Carter and Polevchuk state the housing policies are not usually coordinated with the health policies. The conclusion nearly demonstrates the point of social policy studies to identify existing patterns and relate them to the policy in order for that policy to be made or effective. We're going to look at the summary on page 49. Social policy can investigate the issue of housing from a variety of angles. Unmet housing needs, adequacy of housing, regulating the housing market, and how housing links to other areas of policy concerns such as health and education. In one objective of social policy is to promote better social outcomes by introducing policy that reduces inequalities. The study of housing helps provide the data that would be the basis for many such policies. Thank you so much, ladies. I hope you follow me, and I hope I'm helping your study. I'm reading. You just play it back, keep listening to it over, take some notes, and read your book at the same time. Thank you. Take care. God bless. Speak soon.